On October 15, 1987, an 8-year-old girl disappeared without a trace somewhere along the sun-drenched, tree-lined avenues of Sacramento, California. For 25 long years, her family endured the kind of grief that doesn't fade, the aching silence of not knowing, the cold, relentless weight of uncertainty. Then, in 2012, when her older sister returned to renovate their childhood home, the truth surfaced in the most unthinkable place, the basement. What she uncovered, buried beneath their feet, would upend everything they believed about that crisp fall afternoon. The answers had been there all along, cloaked in dust and memory, hiding in plain sight. This is the story of Lily Morgan, a case that revealed how darkness can sometimes live right beside the light. If stories like this stay with you long after they're told, make sure to leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep sharing the mysteries that matter. Back in 1987, Sacramento was a city on the rise, neighborhoods sprouting along the edge of the valley, tract homes stretching toward the foothills, and the scent of fresh pavement lingering beneath wide Californian skies. In the modest community of Elmhurst Park, where the Morgans lived, life moved slower, held together by neighborly handshakes, backyard barbecues, and the soft hush of sprinklers turning on at dusk. The sidewalks bore the chalky remains of hopscotch grids and bike races. Children darted between lawns, their laughter a daily ritual. People knew each other's names. They borrowed sugar-shared lawnmowers and stayed in the same houses long enough to watch each other's kids grow. Thomas Morgan moved his family into their 2-story on Lindale Drive in 1975, right after landing a steady gig as a mechanic off Stockton Boulevard. With his wife Helen, he built a home that felt anchored solid and lived in, with a big yard out back and a basement workshop that Thomas claimed as his own. The house had thick plaster walls, slanted eaves, and the quiet cool of deep California evenings. It was more than a house. It was a history in the making. Lily, the youngest of the 3 Morgan children, was 8, whip-smart, full of wild wonder, and never in the same place for long. She wandered the neighborhood with a mismatched backpack and grass-stained knees, offering bits of candy to every stray cat and collecting shiny rocks like they were sacred. She loved dismantling her toys just to see what secrets hid inside. Rachel, then 16, was her big sister and part-time disciplinarian, equal parts eye rolls and fierce protection. 12-year-old Ethan, sandwiched in the middle, played the quiet knight, always trailing Lily like a shadow, ready to cover for her when curiosity crossed the line into chaos. Each day had its rhythm. After a breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast thick with grape jelly, Helen's usual Lily would walk the 4 blocks to Edison Elementary. She'd come barreling home after school, downing a peanut butter sandwich in 3 bites, doing her homework at the dining table under Rachel's watchful eye, then bursting outside again, drawn to the sound of kickball in the cul-de-sac or chalk squeaking on the sidewalk. When Helen called her in for dinner, Lily was always the last to come, arms crossed, chin stubborn, pleading. Just 5 more minutes. Sundays had their ritual. The Morgans would all pile into their station wagon and drive to the 10:00 a.m. service at St. Andrew's Church, then swing by Greenhaven Park to buy cherry snow cones from Mr. Doyle's cart, a local legend who'd been selling frozen treats on that corner for longer than Lily had been alive. Thomas Morgan lived his life like clockwork. Up before dawn, coffee in hand, while NPR murmured from the kitchen radio, then off to the garage before the sun rose too high. He didn't speak much, but his presence was like bedrock calm, enduring. He'd spend evenings in his basement fixing old cassette players and broken kitchen appliances for extra cash, the buzz of his soldering iron a comfort. He wasn't warm, not outwardly, but in Elmhurst Park, people respected him for what he knew and how quietly he carried the weight of it. Helen, meanwhile, was the heartbeat of the home. She'd grown up in a town just outside Santa Fe and came west chasing something bigger, not for herself, but for her family. She worked mornings at a downtown diner where she was known for her cinnamon rolls and quick smile. But her real calling was at home. She ran every bake sale, knew every child's birthday on the block, and had the kind of warmth that made you believe everything could be fixed with a hug and a bowl of her chicken noodle soup, the real kind with thick-cut carrots and egg noodles she rolled out by hand. In those days, Elmhurst Park felt untouchable. Children ran wild without fear, garage doors stayed open, and the worst crime anyone could recall was when the Thompsons' rusty old Schwinn vanished from their front porch in '84. So, when October 15th, 1987 came and went, and Lily didn't come home, it didn't just shatter the Morgan family. It splintered the heart of the entire Elmhurst Park community. That Thursday morning had dawned with the kind of gentle crispness only a Sacramento autumn could bring. Lily was up by 7 a.m., same as always. She slipped into her navy blue school uniform and devoured the grilled cheese toast her mom had made fresh on the griddle. Helen noticed something different in her that morning, an electric buzz of excitement, her chatter unrelenting as she rambled about a science project due the following week. "Mom, can you help me catch a frog for my project?" Lily asked, eagerly tugging the straps on her backpack. "Our teacher said we have to pick an animal and observe it." "We'll see about that, sweetheart," Helen said with a smile, brushing a kiss on her daughter's forehead. "Let's just get through today first." From the hallway, Rachel's voice rang out. "Lily, don't you dare leave without me. I'm walking you to the corner." But by the time the words left her mouth, Lily was already halfway down the sidewalk. That was just her way. Every school morning followed the same rhythm. Rachel met Lily at the corner of Maplehurst and Lyndale. Then they walked together until their routes forked Rachel to her high school and Lily to Edison Elementary just 2 blocks farther. But that morning diverged from the script. Rachel spent 5 extra frantic minutes tearing through her room looking for a misplaced copy of Catcher in the Rye. When she finally burst out the door and reached the corner, Lily was gone. She figured her little sister had grown impatient, walked on ahead same as always, and thought nothing of it. At Edison Elementary, Ms. Kramer called roll with her usual calm cadence. "Lily Morgan," she said, her eyes skimming the rows. Silence. "Anyone know where Lily is today?" A few heads shrugged, a few whispered. Kids missed school now and then. Ms. Kramer marked her absent and moved on with the morning lesson. It wasn't until 2 p.m., when Lily hadn't come home for lunch, that Helen felt the first tightening in her chest. Her daughter could be many things, but late for food wasn't one of them. She waited another hour, pacing, watching the clock hands tick louder with every minute. At 3 p.m., she grabbed her purse and hurried down to the school herself. Ms. Kramer met her out front on the steps, her expression pinched. "She never showed up today," the teacher said. "I assumed maybe she was out sick." Helen felt her heart lurch and sink all at once. She drove home fast, half hoping to find Lily kicking a soccer ball in the backyard. But the house was still. Ethan wasn't home from middle school yet, and Rachel wouldn't be back until 5. The silence felt unnatural, cavernous. She took to the streets, calling Lily's name, knocking on doors from one end of the neighborhood to the other. Her first lead came from Mrs. Patterson, who was known for spending her mornings peering out her big bay window with a mug of black coffee. "Yes, honey, I saw Lily," she said, voice quavering. She was heading toward school alone this morning. Rachel wasn't with her like usual. Helen's worry turned sharp-edged with fear. She pressed on, stopping at every front porch. She even made her way to Greenhaven Park and found Mr. Doyle, the snow cone man. "I saw her around 8, he said, scratching his head beneath his weathered giant's cap. She was standing on the corner of Independence and Maplehurst, just waiting. Looked like she was watching for someone. I hollered to her, but she didn't answer." Helen blinked in disbelief. That corner was the wrong direction away from school. Why would she be there? Who was she waiting for? When Thomas walked through the front door at 6, the kitchen was filled with a hush that crackled with dread. Helen was surrounded by concerned neighbors, tears streaking her cheeks. "Lily hasn't come home all day." She managed her voice raw. "No one's seen her. Thomas, A man more built for action than words grabbed his windbreaker, pulled on his boots, and headed straight back out. He knocked on every door in Elmhurst Park, asking clerks, cashiers, mailmen, and old men on porches if they'd seen a little girl in a navy uniform, with tangled hair and a purple backpack. A few neighbors joined him. Flashlights in hand, they fanned out, calling Lily's name into the dark, their voices fading across alleys and yards as the night grew heavier. It was Mr. Walter, the cobbler, whose shop sat quietly on the corner of Independence Avenue, who gave the final lead of the night. "I saw her," he said, rubbing his apron with trembling fingers. "Sometime after 8. She was talking to a man on the corner. Tall guy, dark suit. Had his back to me so I couldn't see his face. Figured maybe he was an uncle or someone from the family. No one in the Morgan house slept that night. Helen sat by the window, unmoving, waiting for the sound of Lily's voice outside for that knock that never came. Thomas went out 3 more times before dawn, retracing the streets, squinting into the shadows. Rachel sobbed into her pillow, guilt soaking through her bones, sure that if she'd just walked her sister like always, none of it would have happened. Ethan lay curled up on the couch, eyes wide, silent, trying to understand how someone could disappear into thin air. And when the sun rose the next day, October 16th, Thomas walked through the doors of the Sacramento Police Department and filed an official missing persons report. The officer behind the desk, a heavy-set man with a salt and pepper mustache and tired eyes, filled out the form with a detached air that made Thomas's skin crawl. "How old's the kid?" the man asked, eyes still fixed on his paperwork. 8. Thomas answered, his voice taut with restraint, every syllable fighting the panic rising in his chest. "How long's she been gone? Since yesterday morning?" The officer exhaled, long and slow. "Mr. Morgan girls that age, they wander off sometimes. Crash at a friend's house without telling anyone. Sometimes they mess up, skip school, and get scared. Honestly, 90% of these cases sort themselves out within a week." But Thomas knew his daughter. Lily was curious. Yes, independent, sure, but she wasn't reckless, and she wasn't cruel. She would never stay gone just to scare them. She'd never break her mother's heart like that. He kept pushing, repeating the facts, refusing to be dismissed. Eventually, the officer relented and agreed to open a formal investigation. The months that followed were the longest the Morgans had ever lived. Each day became a slow, aching march through grief and hollow hope. Helen, drowning in sorrow, developed a kind of sacred ritual. Every morning after Thomas left for the garage and the kids had gone off to school, she retraced the path Lily had walked the day she vanished. She stopped at each corner, scanned every direction, her gaze sweeping across the sidewalks and mailboxes like they could still speak. She whispered prayers under her breath, as if her daughter's footsteps might echo back to her through time. Meanwhile, Thomas buried himself in work during daylight hours, but when night came, he returned to the search. He stapled hundreds of flyers to telephone poles, pinned them in church foyers, laundromats, and grocery stores. The image of Lily, 8 years old, head slightly tilted, a mischievous half-smile on her face, became a haunting fixture in every corner of Elmhurst Park. The word "missing" screamed in bold red beneath her photo, daring people to look away. Rachel, just 16, stepped into a role she hadn't asked for. She helped Ethan with his homework, folded laundry without being asked, and became the quiet strength her parents leaned on, even when her own heart was breaking. But when the house dimmed and everyone had gone to bed, she sobbed into her pillow, the guilt clawing at her chest. If she had just walked with Lily like every other morning, maybe none of this would have happened. Ethan, 12, and bewildered, turned inward. He stopped going outside, stopped answering when kids knocked for him. He spent hours in the room he used to share with Lily, flipping through her picture books, holding her toy frog, as if she might barge in any second and scold him for touching her stuff. The neighborhood changed too. Parents who once waved their kids out the door now gripped their hands tighter. The streets that once echoed with laughter and bouncing basketballs grew strangely still. Whispers carried across hedges and porch railings, Theories, fears, quiet prayers. Some thought Lily had been snatched by a stranger driven out of town in some unmarked van. Others whispered darker things about human trafficking rings or about the canal that ran just east of the park. But the most chilling rumor of all was that she had been taken by the sadist, a shadowy serial killer who had stalked the Sacramento metro in the mid-'80s. He'd never been known to target children, but the timeline was too close, the fear too fresh. Still, the police had nothing. Officers canvassed the school, questioned classmates, teachers, neighbors, anyone who might have spoken to Lily that week. They pulled the records of every registered sex offender in the county. They followed tips from frightened callers and checked empty warehouses, wooded ravines, even irrigation ditches. But they found nothing. No backpack, no shoe, no sign. It was as if Lily had been pulled from the world without leaving a single thread behind. Detective Samuel Hayes took the case personally. He visited the Morgans every couple of weeks, at first always with a clipboard in hand and sorrow in his eyes. He wasn't a man who made empty promises, and they trusted him for that. But time wore down even his resolve. The visits came less often. His words became less certain. "We're still working on it," he'd say, his voice low. "We've circulated Lily's info across other precincts just in case she crossed state lines. But..." He paused one afternoon, voice breaking slightly. "I want to be honest with you. After this long, the chances of finding her alive are slim." But Helen wouldn't hear it. "My daughter is alive," she'd say, pressing her fingers to her heart. "I feel her. A mother knows." And so the years rolled on, silent and sharp. Rachel graduated high school and found a job typing records at a state office downtown. Ethan finished middle school and enrolled in a tech program to study electrical systems. Thomas kept showing up at the auto shop, wrench in hand grease under his nails. Helen still served morning coffee and pecan rolls at the bakery off Main. But they looked older than they were. Grief had hollowed their cheeks and silvered their hair. Then, in 1992, 5 years after Lily disappeared, the phone rang. And for the first time in years, hope crept like a tremor through the Morgan home. A woman in El Paso reported seeing a girl who matched Lily's description. Without a second thought, Thomas drove straight to the border. But when he got there, hope turned to heartbreak. The girl was another missing child from an entirely different family. It was one of many false leads over the years that kept the Morgans strapped into a cruel, emotional roller coaster, soaring one moment, crashing the next. In 1995, 8 years after Lily vanished, Helen joined a support group for parents of missing children. That's where she met Linda Collins, a woman from nearby Tempe, whose own son had disappeared 2 years after Lily. Linda quickly became her closest confidant, not someone who simply sympathized, but someone who truly understood. "We never stop searching," Linda would say gently, her voice soft but steady. "But we also have to learn how to live with the unknown. Our kids still need us wherever they are." In 1998, Rachel married a coworker named Daniel Reed. The wedding was modest, shadowed by Lily's absence, yet still carried the quiet glow of something hopeful of life, pressing forward despite the ache. Thomas walked his daughter down the aisle, with tears brimming in his eyes, silently imagining what it would have meant to have his whole family together on that day. Ethan married 3 years later and moved to Tempe, where he found steady work with a construction crew. He and his wife had 2 sons and named them Lily and Angel in honor of the aunt they never knew. Whenever the boys asked about their names, Ethan would sit them down and tell stories of their Aunt Lily, spinning memories into bedtime tales that kept her spirit alive. Thomas and Helen remained in their house in Elmhurst Park, part hope, part resistance. Hope that one day Lily might walk through the front door and reclaim her place at the dinner table, and resistance against the idea of leaving behind the place that held every trace of her. The home was filled with photos, snapshots of Lily as a baby, with applesauce smeared across her cheeks on her first day of school, grinning with a crooked ponytail, splashing barefoot in the sprinklers, chasing butterflies through the backyard. Her bedroom was left untouched, dolls on the shelf, a stack of picture books near the bed, a tiny sweatshirt still hanging behind the door, preserved like a chapel to memory, waiting for her return. When the new millennium arrived, it brought new hope with it, digital tools and national databases. Rachel, now working in state government, pulled strings to have Lily's case included in a new federal missing persons registry. Her childhood photo was digitally aged to show how she might look at 20, and the updated image was broadcast across state lines. In 2005, 18 years after the worst day of their lives, Helen suffered a mild heart attack. The doctors said it was stress-related, the kind of stress that seeps into the body over decades, carving cracks where grief once lived. That was when Rachel made the decision to move back in with her parents. Daniel didn't hesitate. By then, he was part of the Morgan family, grief and all, and he understood that Rachel needed to be close. They returned to the Elmhurst house in 2006. Rachel took over her old bedroom, the same one with the faded posters on the wall and the uneven closet door, and almost immediately she saw how time had worn her parents down. Thomas, now 60, had arthritis in both hands, the fingers stiff and knotted from a lifetime of wrenching engines and soldering wires. Still, he'd make his way down to the basement to tinker, determined to keep fixing things in a world that kept breaking. Helen, 58, had retreated inward. There were days she didn't get out of bed at all. She'd stopped cooking, stopped tending to her garden, stopped playing her old jazz records that once made the kitchen feel warm. The house itself seemed to have aged with them, paint-faded windows, fogged corners, heavy with dust and silence. Everything sagged under the weight of what was lost. Rachel knew something had to change. Not just repairs, but renewal. The house needed to breathe again, needed light, warmth, movement. In early 2012, she began making plans to renovate the entire home top to bottom. Her parents, now in their 60s, finally agreed, not out of enthusiasm, but necessity. Thomas's arthritis was making the stairs a challenge. Helen's health declined each winter as the old house trapped in dampness and cold. "We need to modernize the place," Rachel told Daniel one evening as they folded laundry. "New heating, new windows, maybe even a ramp so Dad can get downstairs more easily." Daniel, with his background in building and repairs, already had names in mind. "Let's start with the basement," he said. "That's where your dad spends the most time, and it's the one space that hasn't changed since the 80s. The basement had been Thomas's haven for nearly 3 decades. A long, quiet space with exposed beams and walls of aged brick. It held his workbench, a solid oak table, worn smooth by time, rows of tools, hung neatly on hooks, drawers labeled in his precise handwriting, boxes filled with salvaged circuit boards and screws sorted by size. But the basement had problems. Rainwater had been creeping through the basement walls every summer, and the dampness seemed to hang heavier with each passing year. In March of 2012, Rachel brought in a structural engineer to inspect the space, a sharp-eyed young man named Logan Mitchell. It didn't take long before he spotted something troubling along the north wall. "This foundation's compromised," Logan told Rachel, tapping the clipboard against his thigh. "We'll need to reinforce the wall and dig down to install a proper drainage system, or this place is just going to keep flooding." Work was scheduled to begin on March 15, 2012, exactly 24 years and 5 months to the day since Lily disappeared. Rachel hadn't meant to choose that date. It was simply the only one the crew had open. But when she realized the eerie coincidence, it chilled her. Thomas stood in the basement doorway as the workers started dismantling his sanctuary. There was a look on his face, something between nostalgia and quiet heartbreak as he watched them pack up 25 years' worth of tools and trinkets. Every dented screwdriver, every rusted can of nails, every dusty tackle box told a story. This was where he had hidden from grief, one bolt and one solder at a time. "When it's done, it'll be better than new," Rachel said gently, offering him a hopeful smile. The team began excavation near the north wall, exactly where Logan had flagged the structural damage. On the first day, they hauled out debris and loosened the earth. By day 2, they dug nearly 5 feet deep. But it was on the third morning, March 18th, around 10 o'clock, that everything changed. One of the workers, a broad-shouldered man named Troy Jenkins, suddenly shouted from the basement pit, his voice tense and sharp. "Hey! Someone get down here!" A second later, "Hey boss, there's something weird down here." Logan rushed over, brushing past the wheelbarrows and stacks of removed bricks. Buried beneath layers of compacted soil and damp sediment was a small metal container, no bigger than a shoebox, half wrapped in a crinkled black plastic bag. "Don't touch it," Logan warned, lifting his hand. "We leave it right where it is until I figure out how to proceed." Rachel, who'd been in the kitchen pouring sweet tea for the crew, heard the commotion and hurried downstairs. The moment her eyes fell on the box, something twisted deep in her gut, a sick kind of recognition that her mind couldn't quite catch up to. "What is that?" she asked, but a voice inside her already knew. Logan gave a casual shrug. Could be anything he said. People used to bury stuff back in the Depression. Could be cash, maybe jewelry, some old deeds or letters. But Rachel wasn't buying it. There was something too deliberate about its placement, too secretive. The exact depth, the plastic bag, it didn't feel like buried treasure. It felt like a buried truth. She told the team to halt work for the day and grabbed her phone with shaking hands. They found something in the basement, she said, when Daniel picked up. "It's a metal box. I don't know why, but I have the worst feeling about it." Daniel drove straight over on his lunch break. He stepped into the basement, stood at the rim of the pit, and stared at the strange object resting in the soil. The feeling hit him too, a cold, quiet wrongness that settled in his bones. "What do you want to do?" he asked Rachel, his voice low. She didn't answer at first. A part of her wanted to bury the box again, to pretend she'd never seen it. But another part, the part that had spent 2.5 decades aching for answers, knew they had to open it. "We're opening it," she said finally. "But not while my parents are here. We wait until they leave." That afternoon, after Thomas left for his doctor's appointment, and Helen drove off with Linda to pick up her prescriptions, Rachel and Daniel returned to the basement. They lifted the box together, startled by its weight. The metal was cold and crusted with rust, the edges flaking from years of exposure to moisture. They carried it into the backyard where the sun could meet it full on. Daniel grabbed a wrench from his truck and went to work on the corroded latch. It groaned and resisted with every twist, but finally gave way. When the lid creaked open, they both leaned in and held their breath. Inside was a strange and haunting collection of items: a child's t-shirt folded with care, a faded spiral notebook with a corner torn off, a laminated student ID card, a photo, its edges curled, and at the very bottom, the object that made Rachel's stomach drop and her knees buckle. It was Lily's Mickey Mouse wristwatch, the same one she had opened with wide eyes and laughter 3 months before she vanished. Rachel remembered it instantly. She remembered the box it came in, the way Lily twirled around the room with it on her wrist. But it wasn't the watch itself that horrified her. It was the fact that it had been here under their feet all these years. She picked it up with trembling hands. The watch's plastic strap was stained, its bright colors dulled. The hands were frozen at 8:47, and on the inner band beneath a layer of grime was something darker than dirt, something Rachel couldn't bear to name. "This can't be real," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It can't have been here all this time." Daniel crouched beside her, gently sifting through the other items with cautious hands. The shirt was a child's size 8, a simple cotton tee with a small tear near the collar. The same tear Rachel distinctly remembered stitching up just weeks before Lily vanished. The notebook was unmistakable, her name scrawled in big, uneven letters across the top of the first page, Lily Morgan Hayes, grade 3. But it was the photograph that twisted everything from haunting to horrifying. It showed Lily, but not in any picture Rachel had ever seen. She was inside what looked like their basement, the same one where the box had been uncovered, only the room was stripped bare. No tools, no workbench, just raw concrete and cold emptiness. "This picture was taken down here," Daniel said, holding it beside the wall. "But when and who the hell took it?" Rachel leaned in, heart pounding. Lily wasn't smiling. She wasn't posing. Her eyes were swollen red, her face blank or maybe scared. And she was wearing the same outfit she'd had on the day she disappeared. "We need to call the police," Daniel said quietly. But Rachel reached for his arm. "Wait," she whispered. "I need to understand what this means before they come in here and turn our house into a crime scene. Just give me a minute." But thinking was the part that hurt most. Because if that box had been buried in their basement for 25 years, that meant someone with direct access to the house had hidden it, and only family had ever moved freely in and out of that basement. That night, when Thomas and Helen returned home, Rachel brought them into the living room and showed them everything. Helen took one look inside the box and collapsed, her body folding like paper. She had to be helped upstairs, too stunned to speak. Thomas didn't say a word. He simply stared, studying the items as if trying to recognize them in another lifetime. "Where did you find this?" he asked at last, his voice distant. "In the basement," Dad Rachel replied, watching his face. "Buried under the north wall right beneath your workbench. The same one you've used for years." Thomas picked up Lily's Mickey Mouse watch, turning it over in his hands, like it had been dug up from another world. I don't understand," he muttered. How could it have been down there all this time?" Rachel was asking herself the same thing. But there was something strange in his voice. Not shock that the items existed, but disbelief that they had ever been found. Daniel stepped forward. "Mr. Morgan, with all due respect, I think we need to call the police. This could be real evidence about what happened to Lily." "No," Thomas said, firm, final. "Not yet. We need to be sure what this means before we bring them in." Rachel felt something cold creep up her spine. Be sure of what she asked. "Dad, what aren't you telling us?" But Thomas didn't answer. He walked to the door, stopped, and looked back at them with a hollow gaze. This is all too much right now. Let me think. Let me process what's happening." That night, Rachel didn't sleep. Her mind spun in circles, impossible to quiet. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart thudding beneath her ribs, unable to shake one terrifying truth: she had lived above that basement for years after Lily disappeared, eating dinner, doing homework, laughing with friends, never knowing her sister's belongings were buried right beneath her feet. The next morning, with Thomas at work and Helen still resting, Rachel made a decision. She went back down into the basement with a flashlight and a determination she didn't even recognize in herself. She combed through every corner, every crack in the walls, every dusty box. And behind one stack near the old furnace, she found it faint stains on the concrete floor. They had been scrubbed a long time ago, but in the right light, they glowed like shadows that refused to disappear. She called Daniel. "You need to come home right now," she said. "I found something else." When he arrived, she led him into the basement and pointed to the marks. They were irregular in shape, as though someone had tried to clean them but didn't quite finish the job. "You think it's—" Daniel started to ask, but the words caught. "I don't know," Rachel said, her voice even but hollow. "But we need to find out." That evening they knew it was time. When Thomas came through the front door, he found them waiting for him in the living room. The metal box was back on the coffee table, its contents laid out with eerie precision. Dad Rachel said, not looking away, "We need to talk. And this time, we need you to tell us the truth." Thomas sat down slowly, like the years were finally too much to carry. The truth about what he asked, barely audible. "About what happened to Lily," Rachel said. "About why her things were buried in our basement. About the stains on the floor that someone tried to erase." For a long time, Thomas didn't speak. He sat with his head in his hands, elbows on his knees, the air around him thick and still. When he finally opened his mouth, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "It wasn't what you think," Thomas said, his voice low and cracked. It wasn't what the police thought, or what the neighbors whispered. Lily wasn't taken by some stranger. Rachel felt the air in the room shift like the floor itself had tilted under her feet. "What are you saying?" she asked, already terrified of the answer. "She came home that morning," Thomas continued, eyes cast downward. "Around 9:30. She was crying. Said she ran away from school because some kids teased her about her science project. She was embarrassed, scared your mom would be disappointed." "Why didn't you ever tell us that?" Rachel asked, though a deep, sick part of her already knew. "Because I was home," Thomas said, and his voice broke in two. "I stayed home from work, had the flu. I just lost a major job the week before. Your mom was on me about the bills, about everything. I wasn't in a good place. And then she shows up sobbing over something I thought was nothing." The silence was so loud Rachel could hear Daniel's breath catch beside her. "I yelled," Thomas said, his voice distant, louder than I ever had before. "I called her a coward, told her to toughen up, told her girls don't cry over little things. She started crying harder, and I lost it." "What did you do?" "Dad?" Rachel asked, though the words barely left her lips. "I grabbed her arm. I wanted to send her to her room, punish her." She pulled away, tried to run. I pulled back. She tripped over the edge of the dining table, hit her head. And then Thomas collapsed. Not physically, but into himself, the kind of breakdown that sounded feral, as if something unspeakable had been caged for decades and was now clawing its way out. "She didn't get up," he said through sobs. "No matter how much I shook her, how much I screamed. She just didn't move. There was so much blood." I called 911, but it was too late. Rachel stood abruptly, her body rejecting the room, rejecting everything. She had to breathe, had to move. And after that, she asked, barely able to meet his eyes, "Why didn't you just tell the truth?" "The paramedics said the police would have to be notified," Thomas said. "That there'd be questions, an investigation." I panicked. I thought of your mother, of you, of how it would ruin everything. I was afraid they'd think I killed her on purpose, that I'd be locked away, that you'd lose your dad on top of losing your sister. "So you made it look like a kidnapping?" Daniel said, his voice cold and flat. "They said they'd return with the police. I had maybe an hour. I carried Lily down to the basement, buried her in the corner. I cleaned the blood, washed her clothes. I took her things and packed them away in that metal box. When the officers came, I said she never made it home, that she vanished on the way to school. And Mom," Rachel asked. "When she came back, I'd rehearsed the story so many times by then," Thomas said quietly. "Eventually, I started believing it myself." The silence that followed stretched like something suffocating. Rachel realized she had spent 25 years mourning a sister stolen by a faceless stranger. 25 years blaming the world. And all that time, the man who had held their family together was the one who had broken it apart. But worse than that was the realization that she had built her adult life inside a house that had never been a home. It had been a grave. "Where is she?" Rachel asked, her voice dry and cracking. "Where is Lily's body?" Thomas couldn't answer right away. He shook with a kind of sobbing that didn't sound human anymore. "In the basement," he whispered. "Opposite the corner where you found the box. Under the concrete I poured that same night." Rachel's memory lurched. She remembered that week how just days after Lily vanished, her father had redone the basement floor, saying it was to fix a leak. No one questioned it. No one even thought to. 25 years, Rachel said, numb. "We watched you light candles for her every birthday. We saw you put up her posters across the city. You cried with us, held us when we broke. You let Mom fall apart. You let Ethan grow up thinking his sister had been taken by some monster. Because I missed her too," Thomas shouted, rising to his feet, eyes red and desperate. "Because I've spent every day for 25 years living with this, wishing it hadn't happened, wishing I could go back to that moment and take it all back. She was my daughter, Rachel. I loved her, and I destroyed everything in a single, unforgivable second. But you let us suffer, Rachel said, her voice rising with the fury of years buried alive. You let us carry this weight. You let Mom rot with grief. You let Ethan grow up in fear. You let me think I failed her. Daniel stepped in, his voice cutting through the storm like a cold blade. This isn't helping anyone, he said calmly but firmly. Thomas, you need to call the police. Right now. It's been 25 years. You can't keep hiding this, Rachel said, her voice breaking. I can't, Thomas whispered, shaking his head with slow, heavy movements. I can't do that to Helen. Not now. Not with her heart. This would destroy her. Dad! It's destroying all of us! Rachel cried out, the anguish in her voice cutting through the room like glass. This lie has poisoned our family for a quarter of a century. And just then the sound of the front door opening shattered what was left of the moment. Helen was back from her cardiologist appointment. Rachel and Daniel exchanged a look, panic passing between them in a single helpless breath. How do you explain something like this? What's going on? Helen asked, stepping into the living room, her eyes searching their faces. Why is everyone crying? Thomas turned toward her, and in that moment, something inside him gave out. Not weakness, but surrender. After 25 years, the weight of his silence collapsed upon him. Helen, he said gently, please sit down. There's something I need to tell you. About Lily. The next 20 minutes were the most excruciating the Morgan family had ever endured. Helen sat, frozen hands resting in her lap as her husband confessed the truth. She didn't interrupt, didn't raise her voice, didn't ask a single question. She simply listened, unmoving, as if her body had gone numb under the sheer weight of what she was hearing. My baby is in the basement, she finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Yes, Thomas answered, his eyes full of tears. All this time, she murmured, I prayed for her to come home. But she was already home. Slowly, Helen stood and turned toward the basement door. Rachel stepped forward, trying to stop her, but Helen gently moved her aside. I need to see her, she said softly. I need to be near my daughter. They followed her down the stairs. The basement, silent as stone, seemed to hold its breath. Thomas walked ahead and pointed to the southeast corner, the section of concrete that looked just slightly newer, the color faintly different from the rest. She's there, he said. Helen dropped to her knees, placed both hands flat on the cool floor, and closed her eyes as though her touch might somehow reach through the concrete and find her child. My baby, she whispered. My sweet girl, forgive me for not finding you sooner. Rachel knew then that she stood at a crossroads, a moment that would shape the future for better or worse. She could call the police and have her father arrested. She could keep the secret, bury it again, and pretend. Or she could choose something in between, a path of truth, of peace, one that allowed Lily to finally be laid to rest and the family to face the pain together. We're calling the police, she said at last. But first we're going to do this right. Lily deserves a real goodbye. We'll tell Ethan the truth, and we'll face whatever comes as a family. Thomas nodded slowly. He knew there was no other way left. Do you think I'll go to prison? He asked quietly. Maybe, Rachel said. But you're not the same man you were back then. And Lily, she's not suffering anymore. Maybe it's time you stopped suffering too. The call was made that same night, March 19th, 2012. Detective Samuel Hayes, long retired from the homicide division, but still haunted by the case that had never made sense, answered the phone himself. When Rachel told him what they'd found, the silence on the other end stretched long and tight. I'm coming over, he said finally. Don't touch anything until I get there. Within the hour, the Morgan home was filled with the sound of boots on hardwood and radios crackling. Police officers, forensic techs, and investigators from the DA's office moved carefully through the space. Detective Hayes, his hair now white and his steps slower, stood in the basement, holding Lily's Mickey Mouse watch, his weathered face carved with grief and something like closure. In all my years, he told Rachel quietly, this was the one case that kept me up at night. I always knew something was off, but I never imagined this. Excavation began the next morning. The forensic team worked with delicate precision, logging every inch of progress. When they reached the remains, Helen insisted on staying. Her daughter had been wrapped in the blanket from her bed, the one with the faded stars, and placed beside a small wooden crucifix and a family photo taken before the world fell apart. Despite everything, it was clear she had been buried with care. Thomas was arrested that afternoon, charged with involuntary manslaughter and obstruction of justice. His attorney, a man who'd known the Morgans since their earliest years in Elmhurst Park, argued that this was not a crime of cruelty but of desperation and grief. The trial took place 6 months later, in September 2012. The entire city of Sacramento watched as the story unfolded. Local news didn't frame it as just a crime. They told it as a family tragedy, a haunting unraveling of love, silence, guilt, and truth. Thomas pled guilty to both charges, and when he stood in court to deliver his confession, his voice was steady and solemn, the voice of a man who had lived in darkness too long and had finally painfully stepped into the light. "There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret what I did," Thomas said in his final statement, standing before the courtroom with hollowed eyes and shaking hands. "I killed my daughter in a moment of rage, and then I lied for 25 years because I was a coward. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope that telling the truth now can give my family even the smallest piece of peace." The judge, moved by his full confession, his age, and the deeply human complexity of the case, sentenced him to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5. Lily was finally laid to rest on October 15, 2012, exactly 25 years to the day she vanished. The funeral was unlike anything Rachel had ever experienced. It carried the ache of tragedy, but also the strange quiet of long-awaited closure. The entire Elmhurst Park community turned out alongside many of those who had once scoured the streets with flashlights all those years ago. Ethan flew in from Tempe with his wife and 2 sons. When Rachel told him the truth, he went silent. Then came the anger, then the heartbreak, not just for what happened, but for everything that could have been. For years, I blamed myself for not being there to protect her, Ethan told Rachel as they stood at the graveside staring down at the small white stone. "I thought if I'd just walked with her that morning, none of this would have happened. I never imagined the danger was in our own home." What surprised Rachel most was how Helen, the one whose health seemed most fragile, faced the truth with the quiet strength of someone who had already lived through the worst. "At least now I know where my daughter is," she said softly. "I can visit her. I can bring her flowers. I can talk to her. For 25 years, I didn't know if she was out there in pain or cold or scared. Now I know she's at peace." 6 months later, they sold the house on Lyndale Drive. It was time. Rachel and Daniel moved into a home closer to Ethan's family, and Helen came with them. The healing didn't happen all at once. It came slowly, like old wallpaper peeling away layer by layer, year by year. But it came. Thomas served 4.5 years before being released on parole in 2017. By then, he was 71 and his health had deteriorated. Helen made the decision to forgive him, not because what he did could be undone, but because she didn't want to waste the time they had left in bitterness. He lost Lily too. She told Rachel one spring morning as they sat on the back porch. "He's lived with it every single day. What he did was wrong. But breaking whatever's left of this family won't bring her back." Detective Samuel Hayes retired shortly after the case was finally closed. In his last interview with the Sacramento Bee, he reflected on the decades he spent chasing answers. "Sometimes," he said, "the truth is closer than you ever imagine. This case taught me that family secrets can be more dangerous than any stranger in the dark." Lily died in a tragic accident, but the lie that followed is what fractured the family. Rachel eventually channeled her grief into something greater. She founded a non-profit in Lily's name devoted to helping families of missing children. She traveled across California and beyond, giving talks at schools and police departments, sharing her story with the hope that it might stop another family from falling into silence. Truth, she often told her audiences, is better than uncertainty, even if it breaks you, even if it wrecks the image you have of someone you love. My family lost 25 years to a lie, but we finally found peace when we chose to face what was real. Every year on October 15th, the family gathers at the cemetery in Sacramento, where Lily is buried. They bring pink balloons, fresh flowers and toys she would have loved, picture books, little plush animals, a new doll in a box. Ethan brings his sons, who now understand the meaning behind their names, Lily and Grace, and the story of the aunt they never got to meet. When his health allows, Thomas joins them too. He never says much, just kneels quietly at the grave. But each year he brings something new to leave behind: a music box, a wind chime, a stuffed bunny. His way of saying he's sorry. His way of asking for forgiveness that words could never earn. Lily Morgan's case has since been studied in law schools and police academies, not for how it was solved, but for what it revealed about the weight of silence and the cost of not asking hard questions. It became a lesson to every future detective: don't ignore the pain that lives closest to home. Today, the Morgan family has found something like normal again. It's not perfect. It never will be. You don't come back from that kind of grief unchanged. But they've built a life rooted in truth, not illusion, and that's made all the difference. This story reminds us that secrets can poison a family from the inside out, and that even if truth hurts, it can also be the first step toward healing. What do you think of Thomas's decision to hide the truth for so long? Do you believe there was a better way he could have handled what happened? Let us know in the comments. If this story moved you and you'd like to hear more real-life mysteries like Lily's, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, tap the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up to support our work. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth facing. We'll see you in the next story.